Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast, a very special episode of the Duke Wisdom Podcast because we finally have someone new on here. It's finally going to be another voice besides my own. We have Clinton Weaver, who's going to be on the podcast here going forward on episodes with me, maybe even sometimes without me once we get a little bit more into the hang of things. But I'm gonna let Clinton introduce himself and kind of tell you guys a little bit about himself.
Hey, Ben, I appreciate the introduction. Ben and I sort of have a similar background. Big secret. We both went to UNC and we're both Duke fans, which is a very odd combination. But I grew up a Duke fan. My mother, father, brother, sister all went to Duke. I actually started my academic career at Duke until I got my grades, and then it was time to figure out where I was going to go next. But longtime Duke fan, went up and down the road for many, many decades with my father to the basketball games, to football games, and excited to be here and join you.
Yeah, so two guys that graduated from Carolina, two guys with J school experience at Carolina, but very much faithful to the Blue Devils our whole lives nonetheless. Yeah, so I think it's interesting that we have such similar backgrounds, and when Clinton was pitching this to me, we kind of had a call and thought that I think it's an advantage that we have similar backgrounds, but also that we have some differences at the same time, and we can play off of each other and kind of make this thing a little bit more interesting. I appreciate everybody who has listened throughout the last year that I've been doing this and everything, but I know it might get a little old just listening to me ramble on for 30 to 40 minutes.
Hopefully we can break up the monotony a little bit.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal anyway. So, well, Clint and I we met for the first time in person on Saturday because we were both at the Duke Carolina football game, which is going to be the topic of a lot of this episode, at least. And so I was in the press box for Duke Carolina. It was the second game that I've been on press row for Duke football this year. I didn't go to the Elon game, first game of the season, because that was a Friday night. It conflicts with my work schedule, but I made it to this one. This is my first Duke Carolina football game, at least. I've covered Duke Carolina for women's basketball and lacrosse, but this was my first one for football. And it was a bit of a crazy one. Yeah. So I'm going to let you talk about kind of your experience in the stands and kind of how that game went for you in terms of your actual experience in person.
You know, anytime I see that baby blue on a uniform, my blood pressure goes up a lot, and I have sort of a visceral negative experience. It's just the rivalry, it just raises the blood pressure, makes everybody a little more lively. And I definitely heard a lot of chatter out on the concourse. Some marauding UNC students who dared to set foot in Wallace Wade and had a few choice words for the Duke faithful. And then the Duke fans were giving it right back to them, of course. A lot of references to a 70-50 score that happened about a week or so ago. So it's always fun, when the two shades of blue get together. And my daughter, who went with me, was asking where she could get a Go to Hell Carolina t-shirt. So she figured out which side to be on in pretty short order. But, it's always fun and quite a game.
Yeah, so you told me that your daughter was in search of Cooper Flag autographs on Saturday night. Did she have any luck with that?
Right. That was her ulterior motive. She thinks football is terribly boring. She loves basketball. And last year, she got Jared McCain's photo. Year before that, she got Derek Lively. So she's basically there to scope out the basketball players and try and hunt them down for a photograph, but no such luck this time. I don't think Cooper was in the stadium.
Yeah, so there were some guys in the stadium, but and I think they actually had a similar trajectory than you because you left a little bit early. And is that right?
Right. So my wife and daughter, I'm going to blame them that they're good for about a half of football, and then it's time to go. And so we actually have done that for a lot of games, and then I go home and watch the second half on TV. This was a terrible one. I would have rather watched the second half in person, and but that's the way it worked out. So I missed the historic comeback. Walked out with a lot of other unhappy fans. I wasn't too terribly disconsolate to be leaving, actually, given what had happened in the first half. And some of the Duke students, one of them I overheard saying, he said, it's too bad Duke is not good at football, because I'd actually rather go to football games than basketball games, which was a very strange thing to hear coming from a Duke student.
Well, let them come out now, man. I mean, we're talking about a 5-0
Right.
program now,
Right.
but I can't blame you too much for leaving early. I mean, I'm sitting up there. I actually stayed in, like, they have a little area where you can eat like dinner. They have a meal that they provide to media, and they have a little area there. And I kind of sat out there for the first 3 or 4 minutes of the third quarter, just because I was like, well, there's not much for me to go back out there to the window. Like, not much is going on right now. I even told a colleague where I was like, I'm not really surprised to see this score, because I figured that Carolina would have a fire lit under them because of that 70-50 loss to James Madison. That was an absolute embarrassment. And I said that I didn't see a comeback coming in the second half. Well, don't take betting advice from me all the time, because I was definitely off on that one. But
well, I think that speaks sort of to the psychology of sports in a way. Carolina comes off this horrible loss. They come out extraordinarily motivated. One Carolina player was flipping the double birds at the Duke fans in the stand, even before the game began, which that really got my blood boiling. But they were playing lights out football in the first half, and Duke, I think the most emblematic play of the first half was the field goal that clanged off the goalpost. Kind of summed things up quite nicely for the first half. And then, lo and behold, Manny Diaz apparently gave the speech of his life in the locker room. He said, we have the chance to do something legendary. That's the word he used.
Yeah.
And they did. They did something actually historic. Biggest comeback ever in the second half against UNC.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that kick from Todd Polino, because when that thing dudded off the right upright, I think that was sort of everybody has their hopes up, and then it just sort of sinks down, and that's exactly what the entire first half felt like. Like, it felt like this is going to be a game where Duke can go 5-0, and then everybody's thinking, oh, just another loss to Carolina. Same old story, same old song. And I think I tweeted something in the first half, actually, that was along the lines of, this game feels a lot like the Notre Dame game from last season, where it looks like they're going to have the opportunity to really make the next step, be a really good team, and then they're going to let us down a little bit. But it turned out that they very much didn't. Now, was the competition the same as Notre Dame last year? No, Carolina's not that good. But nonetheless, it still says something about them and their resiliency that they were able to make that comeback, I think.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. They just couldn't get anything going in the first half. And Malik Murphy really did not look very good. He had 60 yards passing and, a lot of 3 and outs, a lot of drop passes, even the ones that were on the money. So there was really no reason to be encouraged. And that really persisted not just through the first half, but also halfway through the third quarter, and when you consider that, it really came down to a quarter and a half of good football, but that was enough to come away with the victory.
Yeah. I mean, I'm impressed by Malik Murphy's second half and his ability to kind of clean up what he was doing. And Manny Diaz said the same thing, when it's easy to get in your head with a game like that. But he was impressed that Malik was able to clean it up. I think on the other side of that first half does worry me a little bit moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's times where Carolina's line was just giving Malik 15, 20 yards on the ground, and he just wouldn't take it. He just was airing out passes that were thrown over. And I know that's not part of his game, but it feels almost like you've got to be able to take those opportunities when they're given.
Well, he certainly looks like he should be able to run. I mean, he's an absolute physical specimen. He, 6'5" and built. I don't see why he cannot run for sure. And
yeah, I don't believe that he isn't physically able. Yeah, I agree with you.
But what up through there was the crazy punt play, and then Carolina hits a big pass, and then they're marching down the field. And it looks like, they're getting ready to go up, 24-0 at that point with the touchdown. And so the really big play to me was when Carolina went for it on 4th and short, and it looked like they got it, but there was a holding call, and that pushed them back. And so they had to kick a field goal, and that kept them within 3 scores at 20-0. And that turned out to be really, really critical. And from there on, it was a different ball game.
Yeah, it definitely was. I want to highlight a few of the just kind of historical stats and kind of things that were broken up. You mentioned that it was the biggest second half comeback against Carolina. That is absolutely true. It is the second biggest comeback in program history, period. The current record still, the record being a 21-point comeback against Florida in 1962. They were down 21-0, ended up winning 28-21. This, of course, most people probably know, is the first time Duke has beat Carolina in 6 years. It is also the first time Duke has beat Mack Brown since 1989. That is 13 straight wins Mack Brown had over Duke. And frankly, I'm not so sure that Mac's going to get the chance to get Duke back after that one.
Right.
And you got to think it's got to sting for him a little bit with it coming to Manny Diaz, a guy that he fired on his Texas staff a little over 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah. A poetic justice. And Mac gave up the most points ever in Kenan Stadium the week before. So he's busy setting a lot of records that are probably going to help him ride off into the sunset, into a nice early retirement, or maybe a late retirement.
Yeah. Do you think there's any way that Carolina brings Mack Brown back?
I think Mac should have left with Drake May if he had been a smart man, because Drake May was making him look pretty darn good. And also, while we're mentioning it, those last 2 W's that he had over Duke, I don't know. The refs had a lot to say with that. And it's poetic justice that we got the win this time, because I feel that we totally got robbed the previous 2 games.
Yeah, those were definitely 2 really frustrating losses to watch, I think, and especially watching 2 competent, good Duke teams play in those. And I think it's funny, because I think if either of those Elko Duke teams played this Carolina team, I mean, it wouldn't even be a close ball game. I don't even think a little bit. But I don't. I'm right there with you. I think Mac, he should have. He had the luxury of having some really good quarterbacks over the last few years. And when he looked at this roster and saw that there was no top 3 pick in the NFL draft leading his offense, it might have been, maybe it should have been his cue.
Right. Exactly. Stage left.
Yeah. So I guess moving on to a little bit of our impressions from the second half, and I'll tell a little bit of my experience in the box, is that everybody was just sort of, a lot of the people covering Carolina seemed very laid back, even poking fun at certain plays by Duke. But I can tell you midway through the 4th, that wasn't the case. That was not the case at all. The energy in there had changed. The energy in the stadium had changed. Fantastic fan presence from the entire stadium, and especially the students. I was lucky enough to be recording, just happened to decide to start recording when Trey Freeman had the interception to seal the game, and the noise you can hear from the crowd after that play I mean, that's what you imagine and hope that Wallace Wade can be week in, week out in a perfect world where Duke football does garner attention like that guy you said, that student you said walking out. If everybody felt that way about Duke football, we'd have that kind of stadium every night. But I think it was a fantastic atmosphere, and really the word that kept coming up by Manny Diaz and all the players in the press conference was the sewer.
Right.
And it really did feel like they were dragging Carolina through the sewer. I mean, Carolina looked helpless, like they just didn't know what to do. They looked like they had their head screwed on. They had been yelled at all week, and they looked like it in the first half. Like they were ready. They were covering all long passes. Their safeties were doing a great job. And then just all of a sudden, Duke decides, let's start giving the ball to Star Thomas.
Right. And
yeah,
the conditioning coach has had a lot to do with this, the fourth quarter performance. And he was there, obviously, before under Elko as well. But, a lot of games are won and lost in the fourth quarter, and that's when people get tired. This is true in basketball. It's true in football. And I think the fact that we were ready to play the fourth quarter and they weren't is somewhat a function of that.
Yeah, I think that I want to go back to Star. I think Star Thomas, what an amazing story that he's had over these last couple of weeks. Jaquez Moore goes down against Northwestern. He kind of walks into the running back, the number one running back slot, if you will, and he has a kid like just a few days before the UConn game, and shows out against UConn, and has been spectacular ever since. He was the ACC running back of the week this week, and I think that he was just so important for what happened in that fourth quarter, because the whole first half you're watching Amari and Hampton just take the ball and plow down the field and get Carolina in a position where they can score, even if that means just bringing Noah Burnett out and kicking a field goal. I mean, he's one of the most reliable kickers in college football. And that was so important for Carolina to be able to get on the board. Duke wasn't doing that in the first half. They were relying a little bit too much on long plays, even on like second and third downs. They were trying to air it out, and it didn't work. And that's what led to a lot of those 3 and outs that you were talking about earlier. And so getting Star Thomas to be Duke's own Omari and Hampton, their own star running back, he was able to open up the field and allow Malik Murphy a little bit of more time, a little bit more space, because Carolina has to now account for this really dynamic power on the offensive end that Star Thomas has become and that he's shown that he can be. And so I think that he was certainly the MVP of this game, and I think he's going to be a guy that Duke leans on moving forward.
I absolutely agree. Never was a better named athlete than Star Thomas, because he was the star of this game. And he had 166 yards running, 45 yards receiving. So that's 211 total. And the guy on the other side, the alleged All-American, he had 103 running and 50 receiving, 153 total. So what impressed me most about Star is he's very shifty. He's quick and powerful, but he makes some very interesting moves. He makes people miss, and he's very dynamic in that way. And I'm really glad we found him, because, I was worried what was going to happen after Jordan Waters decided to transfer to NC State. But Mr. Waters is struggling a little bit over there. And then we lost Jaquez Moore. So more uncertainty. Who's going to be the running back? And it turns out we got a couple of good ones, Star Thomas and Peyton Jones.
Yeah. Peyton Jones is certainly a guy that deserves a lot of love and a lot of acclaim. He had the game-winning touchdown on Saturday as well. And you mentioned Jordan Waters, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because I do think it's this funny trend where we have Jordan Waters, Riley Leonard, and Mike Elko, and all these other guys that have left Duke, and it almost seems like a curse. Like all these guys left for what seemed like greener pastures, and not doing so hot. Elko's picked it back up at A&M a little bit, but in the SEC, he's going to rack up some losses. Riley gets the loss to Northern Illinois at Notre Dame, and NC State obviously has not done what they wanted to do this season with blowout losses to Tennessee and to Clemson. I mean, do you think that this is a little bit of a statement for the Duke program, that it's like, maybe you should stick around, maybe we're not so bad after all?
Well, I think hopefully over time, Duke is looked at that way, as a different program than maybe it's been viewed in the past, as a result of some of the success, if we're able to sustain it. But I want to give props to the O-line and the D-line, because, they don't get their flowers very often, but that's really where this game was won. And I think we have to give props to Manny Diaz as the coach who coached him up. He made some significant changes at halftime. Mac Brown did not. And whereas they had us bottled up in the first half and we couldn't throw the long ball, well, we figured out we can run the ball, and Mac Brown never adjusted to that.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network to DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
Yeah, I think that Manny did a really good job. I think he certainly did. And yeah, like you said, it looked like Carolina was just doing the exact same thing. I mean, they were even running the exact same plays, honestly, in the second half that had worked. But Duke had obviously game planned those plays by that point, and they just weren't working anymore. There wasn't a lot of adaptation by the Carolina offense. And as for Diaz, yeah, and there were some guys in the press box even talking about this. I can't step foot in that stadium and look at Manny Diaz without thinking of that Duke Miami game from 2015, where there were the 8 lateral plays.
Oh yeah,
on the last play. I was there. It was Halloween night, and that was a horrible game. And it's crazy to me now that there might be a game that it's maybe not as memorable, but it is in a way. It's pretty memorable. But there's a game that at least somewhat rivals that one involving Manny Diaz, and it's a positive memory. I mean, who would have thought, right?
I'm happy for him. I'm happy that he got some retribution from the guy who fired him. And, in terms of Miami, well, we'll see what happens there because they're on our schedule. But he might have another chance at some revenge from another previous employer that decided to let him go.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that is the 9th game on Duke's schedule. And kind of the next thing I want to talk about is the rest of Duke's schedule. I mean, what does this win mean for Duke, and how good are they actually? Because obviously the new AP poll just came out, and Duke is not ranked. Not only are they not ranked, they didn't receive a single vote to be ranked, which is not normal. Usually, if Duke starts a year 3 or 4-0, they're kind of at the very bottom. They're 21 to 25, somewhere in that range. But this year, this is a 5-0 Duke team. This is the best start Duke's had since 1994. And no one's even considering them to be ranked. They're tied with Miami for the best record in the ACC. No one really seems to care. Do you kind of agree that this is sort of a circumstance of Duke just hasn't played anybody, and if they did, they'd lose? Or do you think that maybe people are looking a little bit past this team still?
Well, I think we might get the answer to that question this coming Saturday, right? They're playing Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech. And that's a hard place to win for Duke historically. Georgia Tech beat Florida State to start the year, and we thought that was a great win. Turns out Florida State is really down this year. So But I do see that as a big test. But if they can go to 6-0 and beat Georgia Tech at Tech, then they'll probably be in the rankings, and they'll definitely deserve to be there. The previous wins, kind of iffy. They haven't beat anybody terribly notable. And the games that they've won, sometimes they've won in sort of ugly fashion. So to me, the jury's still out. I'm not ready to drink the Kool-Aid just yet. I want to see what happens, But the league is going through some stuff right now. Florida State is very down. We thought they'd be good. I saw SMU early. They didn't look very good to me. Miami's a surprise to the upside, but State is not what they were advertised to be. So a lot of games on the schedule that probably looked like L's, maybe not.
I think even with Miami, it's not. I don't think I thought the L was written in stone at Miami for a while, but then watching them play Virginia Tech this past weekend, I'm thinking, I don't think it's so written in stone. And it's sort of like you mentioned with Manny Diaz's history with Miami. There might be some revenge seeking going on there and some added incentive for Duke to win that game. And so I don't know. I don't know if there's a single game on Duke's schedule left that I think that they either can't or shouldn't win. Problem is, they're gonna, right? Like, there's no way that Duke's running the table. There's no way we're looking at a 12-0 football team. That's not going to happen. So the loss. So it's just when are the losses that shouldn't happen? When are they gonna happen? That's the thought for me. I think that it might happen this Saturday. I think that this is a trap game. This is a Georgia Tech team that is capable of beating good teams. Georgia Tech sort of plays to its competition, tends to do that. And so I'm thinking road game at Georgia Tech coming off this emotional win against Carolina. This is a trap game. And I think that they can get back on track after it and beat Florida State and SMU. I ultimately think Duke probably ends the season somewhere around 8-4 or 9-3. 9-3 seems like a decent projection at this point. But
so you're including the ACC championship in that calculus, the 12 games?
Well, yeah. I think it's not. Well, that's my next question, I guess, is can they make it? Can Duke make the ACC championship? Is it a realistic thought to think that Duke can play in the ACC championship? I have my thoughts on it, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, first of all, I'd say, 8-3 seems reasonable for this team. I think if you're saying 12-0, you're drinking something other than Kool-Aid for sure. So can they be in that game? Maybe one of the two best. Yeah, maybe. It's just such a weird year. I mean, Wake Forest looks horrible. Virginia Tech has been very variable. The Duke schedule is, pretty favorable, actually. We don't have Clemson. Miami's the big one. I agree with you. Could be a likely loss against Georgia Tech, and then maybe one other. I don't know which one. So is 8-3 going to be good enough to get us into that game? Maybe so. It's just a very strange year for the league.
I think that if Duke's going to get into that championship, they're going to need some favors from some other teams. And I think those favors are going to be somebody needs to beat Miami that isn't them, because they're probably not going to do it. But even if they did, they need somebody else to beat Miami, or they need somebody else, or maybe two somebodies to beat Clemson. I don't think that's going to happen in the case of Clemson. I think Clemson is actually legit. I think they're a very good team. I think it's possible Clemson runs the table the rest of the season. But I think that if you look at it this way, if Clemson did run the table the rest of the season, in that scenario in which if Duke only lost to Miami, their only loss was to Miami, they had an 11-1 season, and then Miami also ran the table, it wouldn't even matter. Duke wouldn't make the championship game just because of that. But I will say, I don't think Miami's going to run the table, even with a win against Duke. but I think Clemson might. And that's going to make things difficult. That Miami game might end up being a Duke has to pull an upset off here.
Yeah, I think maybe Miami Clemson in the championship is more reasonable. I'm just not ready to think that we're going to leap that far ahead in a season that we came into thinking 6 wins would be good, and now we think 8 wins would be good, but 11 or, even making the championship, given that Miami and Clemson are both good teams this year, that's probably a more likely outcome.
Yeah. I think, it's a real shame because I think give this schedule to a healthy with Riley Leonard team from last year, and I honestly wouldn't even feel outlandish saying that team could go 11-1. I feel a little bit silly saying that this one can, but
no, I agree with you. I was there last year for the Clemson victory and the Notre Dame snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and that was really, really painful. And but for this team to be where it is, even after losing Riley and so many other veterans, it's really quite amazing.
Yeah. Well, nonetheless, we're looking at a 5-0 football team and a very, very excited podcast here because we've got somebody new on the podcast. Very exciting times at Duke Wisdom in general, with the podcast evolving, with coverage evolving, and in person more and more whenever I had the opportunity. And so I'm just very excited about what's to come for Duke Athletics, what's to come for Duke Wisdom. And I want to thank you, Clinton, for coming on and being a part of this.
Hey, it's been great fun, and I hope we can do some more.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in and listening, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to it, and follow Duke Wisdom on Instagram and X/Twitter. And we'll talk to you guys later.